right? If you want to just engage with low-hanging fruit Calvinists that are on the internet that have not a clue what they're talking about, then please continue to do that. But if you want to come into the realm of those of us who are Calvinists who have a better understanding of the philosophical side of these things, you need to know and to speak and to use terminology in a little better way. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A Pastor's Thoughts. My name is Chris Harris, and today we're going to do much the same. We're gonna look at a video that Leighton did. Imagine that. You know, Leighton's like one of those guys. He's like, it's good for the party. It's good for the party when it comes to theological discussions. And today we're going to look at a video that Leighton did with Warren McGrew, where they talked about objections to total depravity. Now, this should be right up my alley here. We've been talking about that, or we, the royal we at that point. I've been talking about that in the last couple of videos with Leighton. So I'm going to share this video that he did with Warren. We're going to listen to it, and I'm going to give some commentary as we go along. I don't have a sidekick right now. Maybe at some point I'll have somebody come in, but for right now, it's just you and me. And we'll just have to see how this goes. Again, remember, this place is laid back. I'm not going to, well, I will get into some technical points. I can get into scripture and do a bunch of things. I don't have this completely planned out, though. I just want to watch the video and react as it goes. These are all topics I've dealt with for years. There's not going to be anything new. I have watched a good bit of this video, and there's some good stuff to get into. So I don't know how long this is going to be. May do this in a few parts or something. They make a Leighton video, right, which lasts 2 or 3 hours. So not that I want to do that, but I have a few minutes. The kids are out at a birthday party. Let's watch this video together, and we'll have some comments. Let me share it for you. And there we go. All right, so now we have Leighton and Warren. This topic is, you can see at the bottom there, it is answering objections. So this is answering objections to, if I'm not mistaken, it's total depravity. I think it's the rest of the title. So we're just going to give it away. Now, I do have it set. Let's see. I have it on 1.5, but I think that's going to be a little too fast. So we'll go to 1.25. I mean, I usually listen around, I'll start listening around 1.5 and I'll get it to 2 pretty quickly. Once your ear gets used to, 1.5, you can bump it up, but it's a little hard for people who are just coming in watching the video to get that. So without further ado, let's hear from the man himself, Leighton Flowers and Warren McGrew.
That. And so today we're going to be talking about, what we titled there in the thumbnail, the objections to human responsibility. And you may think, well,
okay, I had it wrong. Not total depravity, but human responsibility. Gets along the same lines. But anyway, objections to human responsibility. See how he puts this together.
Well, why would you, talk about objections to human responsibility? Nobody objects that we are responsible humans. But if people are going to say that, we're objecting to human sinfulness or human depravity, then we have every right to say they're objecting to human responsibility, because we agree with human depravity. We believe that humans, because of their sin, are sinful and corrupt and are depraved and have a corrupt nature. And we believe that they have problems because of sin and being cast out of the garden and all those things. And so our objection, when we talk about objections to total depravity, are specifically our objections to the Calvinism's understanding of total depravity and what it entails. And so,
as you've heard, if you've watched any of my previous videos, but I'll mention it again here. I'm not convinced that Leighton understands the Calvinist perspective of total depravity. In fact, Warren gets into it in a little bit, I believe. And he mentions a video that I do need to go check out. And Warren, I will check it out, where you say you lay it out from a historical perspective and you get kind of into it. And you've had people tell you it's really good. Maybe it is. I'm not saying that you're wrong there, but I think some of the conclusions you draw are way off base, or they have like faulty foundations you're building from. So, of course, that's the same for Leighton. So let's continue.
Too, whenever we make the statement there on the broadcast, objections to human responsibility, what are we insinuating? What's our implication? Well, because of what Calvinists believe, we don't believe they hold to a biblical concept of human responsibility. They don't believe humans are able to respond positively to the proffered gospel, and therefore they undermine, in our estimation,
A biblical model of human responsibility. I wish he would lay that out, right? Because what he means, he wants to like smuggle in this idea of libertarian free will. I know that's what's coming. In fact, he mentions it at some point coming forward. But I mean, Leighton, if the debate is like, because both sides of this agree that there's human responsibility, right? You've already made that the case, right? Both sides agree. So the question is going to be like, what is necessary for human responsibility? You can't just beg the question and say, well, what I hold to, what I affirm as far as libertarian free will is concerned, contra causal freedom, right? That just is the biblical model of freedom. Therefore, that is required for a moral responsibility when it comes to a biblical model. And I'm like, no, that is classic question begging. You're assuming your conclusion before you even start the discussion or the argument. So yeah, let's keep going.
Human responsibility, all the while saying they don't undermine human responsibility, but we would say the implications of their system do undermine human responsibility, and here's why. And so this is one of the reasons the accusation of misrepresentation is so often banted around, is because sometimes we're talking about the logical implications of the claims of the system, not their stated beliefs. Calvinists would never state, I don't believe humans are responsible, okay? But it is, according to us and our argument, it is a logical implication of their belief.
Yeah, your argument's wrong. I'm not getting into that. We'll get into it later in the video. But yeah, your argument is bad wrong. Yeah, I would tell that to Tim too. So I like Stratton though. Really do like Stratton, but his argument's not. It doesn't do what he needs it to do.
That they undermine human responsibility. That total depravity, their concept and understanding of total depravity, that men are born by divine decree in a condition where they cannot respond positively to.
Leighton, I want to ask you this at this point. Well, I mean, at any point, I don't care when you do it, but would you define what you mean by divine decree? Like, let me know that you understand what the divine decree is. In a minute, you're going to talk about it causing things. Well, let me just tell you right now that the divine decree doesn't cause anything. It has no positive, there is no positive exertion from the divine decree upon creation itself. That's a different, that's a different thing altogether. The divine decree is the divine plan, right? Providence is what brings about that degree. Providence is everywhere within the world through secondary means. There are actions that God does directly that is involved in providence, and providence is also just worked out in secondary causations. But anyway, define what you mean by decree. I don't know. You seem to think it's this magical, like this potion or this incantation that God utters, and all of a sudden all these things start happening, and that's just not the case.
To God's own appeals to be reconciled from the fallen condition. We believe that removes their blameworthiness for denying Christ. I mean, it's a really good excuse for denying Christ. I was born unable to accept Christ, right?
What do we mean by unable? In fact, in a minute, it's going to be brought up, and we'll never get through this thing, or I'll never get through this thing because I'm stopping like every 2 seconds. But whatever, right? It's my show. In a minute, Matt Slick's going to answer this question, and you'll notice, and I'll try to like wait until we get there. Hopefully, I'll quit stopping it so much. But he's just going to gloss over what Matt Slick says about this. So he assumes what he means by unable just is what the Calvinist means by unable. All right. Yeah.
And so that's why we're pushing back on this. And I wanted Warren on here because Warren, in my watching his program and appreciating his work, one of the things we do walk lockstep in for most of what I've heard, at least, is his understanding and of the human nature and human depravity and some of those issues that he has really unpacked, I think, very well in his program, going through the passages one by one, dissecting them, showing that they don't say what the Calvinist is implying, at least some Calvinists, because Calvinists are not a monolithic group when it comes to this issue, which we learned when we talked to Adam Harwood. I don't know if you saw that show, Warren, but Adam actually shows where Luther calls Ulrich Zwingli a Pelagian because he has a differing view of the inherited guilt of Adam. I thought that was interesting.
I love Dr. Harwood. I need to get him back on Idol Killer. Are we?
All right, I'm going to skip forward a little bit because they like talk about some stuff that I'm not wanting to interact with.
Go whenever I put it together, just being silly. And from time to time, they'll be like, Daddy, put on that video where you...
Discussion. If you're actually asking a question that has to do with what we're talking about. So that
Yes, looking forward to it.
All right, here we go.
So how would you define total depravity? Because I know some, how would you define total depravity, and how would you associate that with original sin? How would you associate those two together?
Total depravity is a teaching that sin has touched all of what we are: heart, soul, mind, body. We're not as bad as we can be. I mean, the average unbeliever, maybe an atheist, he's not going out murdering, raping, pillaging, things like that. But what total depravity says is that the heart, the mind, the soul, the body, the emotions, the intellect, everything is affected by sin. And the effect of that sin is that they will not come to Christ on their own free will. And so free will, of course, need to talk about what that.
Whoa. Got to cut you off there, Leighton, for a second. Matt Slick is 100% right here. He lays it out in a pretty good way. I couldn't agree much more with what Slick said. Now, you can offer a little more detail, and that's what I'm going to try to do, is offer some more detail to what Matt Slick's talking about. So Leighton's going to bring this up in a minute, and I'll interact with that at the end, but I want to add that detail in now that goes within what Matt Slick was talking about, totally depraved, that sin has touched the entirety of your person. I've said this in the last two videos that I've made, right? It's that nothing escapes the touch of sin. But that doesn't mean now when we say, along with this total depravity, that people aren't as bad as they can be, this what Matt Slick talked about, that people aren't out there just always going around murdering people. That doesn't mean when they're not murdering people that they're not in sin, right? And I think this is a point that gets lost. It doesn't get dealt with when it comes to what how Leighton and Warren both approach this topic. Right? People are still sinful. They are still sinners. They are still sinning, even when they're not being as bad as they can. I even brought up some good examples out in the world, and I brought in the distinctions of the categories of the horizontal and the vertical. So when we talk about whether something is sin or not, or whether or not it's good rather than sin, I mean, just everything an unbeliever does is sin. Anything you do in your life without God at the center of it is sin, right? But with the categories of the horizontal and the vertical. So the horizontal would be how something is viewed from man to man, and the vertical would be how something is viewed from God to man, right? So you have a horizontal, man to man, and a vertical, God to man. These are two perspectives that you have to keep in mind when you talk about something that's good. If you don't, then you're never going to understand what is spiritually acceptable or spiritually good, right? And in this way, many people who are many unbelievers, atheists or whatever, they can do really good things on the horizontal, right? That means that if you saw that act as a fellow man, a person of fellow mankind, you would say that is a good thing, right? This could be donations to charity. It could be saving people. There are tons of things that can be done by the unbeliever that we would look at and we'd say those are good things. They are not, if they are done by an unbeliever, someone who is outside of the family of God, someone who does not live their life in a way that they walk according to the Spirit that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 8, right? Those good things that they do that we see that are good, they're filthy rags unto God. And that's what we need to understand about this doctrine when it comes to inability, right? People can choose good things, to do good things, but those things aren't good in the eyes of God, because they're done for reasons other than giving glory to the Creator, right? They're done in order to have something to boast about, or to have some kind of self-interest to make yourself feel better. I mean, there are even good people, there are even unbelievers out there that would do things, and they'll do it anonymously because they don't want other people to see it, but they're doing it for selfish purposes. They want themselves to feel better. They want to feel better about themselves and who they are. They don't want to do it to honor God, and in that, it is still sin, right? So the inability of the non-believer to please God is not wrapped up in the loss of some faculty of the will in order to make a choice. It's the simple fact that every choice they do make is made other than with God as the reason and the center of that choice. Therefore, that choice is always sin. It's always against that which is spiritually good. And even Matt Slick is going to mention here in a minute. We're going to listen to it. Right, he's going to make this very same point, not quite as in detail as I made it, but it's the same point that they can have an intellectual understanding of spiritual things, these unbelievers, They could even teach classes on doctrines of the faith or some type of church history or something of that sort. But that's quite different than them having faith, them having God at the center of their lives and making their choices revolve around the Creator rather than themselves. And that's what inability comes from. That this is what we are apart from faith in Christ. This is what we are outside of the family of God. This is what we are as an enemy of God, as a slave to sin. Utterly important to understand if you want to engage with this. And here's the thing, guys. This is just Christianity 101. Basically every main denomination believes the same thing about man apart from faith in Christ. Right? And they have different ways in which they deal with that. The Calvinists deal with it with regeneration. Right? The Arminians deal with it with what they call prevenient grace. Right? The Catholics deal with it by their works. Right? Don't want to get into them right now. But I'm saying that just the broad stroke of Christianity believes in this, believes that man is in this state due to the fall of Adam. Leighton's saying that's not the case. But anyway, I'm going to back it up just a little bit because I went a little long there where I was going to add into Slick, and we'll back up just a little bit. We'll hear a little bit of the end of Slick, and then we'll come back to Leighton.
Atheist, he's not going out murdering, raping, pillaging, things like that. But what total depravity says is that the heart, the mind, the soul, the body, the emotions, the intellect, everything is affected by sin. And the effect of that sin is that they will not come to Christ on their own free will. And so free will, of course, we need to talk about what that.
Okay, so I do want to talk about that for just a moment, because we'll often talk about this, is that Calvinists will often say total depravity doesn't mean you're as bad as you could be. In other words, you don't do as many bad things with your hands and your feet, for example, if I were to use body parts as part of the analogy. Not everybody's out there murdering people with their hands or stealing things with their hands or going to places they shouldn't be going with their feet. Not everybody, just because they are an unbeliever, are doing as many bad things as they could be doing. And everybody knows that's the case.
That doesn't mean that they're not always sinning. That's my point. And see, I think he has a different idea here, though. Like if they're not doing bad things, then apparently they're not sinning. Right?
So everybody knows the little grandma down the street who maybe not know Jesus is not stealing anything, and she might pay her taxes, and she might be altruistic and giving to the poor, and she might be doing a lot of good things, but not be a believer. And so the Calvinist makes a qualification for that. These people aren't as bad as they could be with their hands.
But they are still sinning, Adam. Leighton, they're still sinning. Those things they do, those good things they do, are apart from God. That's not the reason why they're done. They don't do that unto the glory of God. Therefore, that is sin.
And their feet. Now, if they would apply that same principle to the spiritual eyes and spiritual ears of a person, then they would have a really good anthropology.
See, he's brought this up a couple times. In fact, I dealt with it earlier. I guess it keeps getting a little easier. But yeah, this is where this comes in. This is why I say that Leighton's under the impression, it seems, that when we say that people aren't as bad as they can be, it means that they sin sometimes and they don't. Well, that's not what we posit. They always sin. They cannot not sin, in fact, is the way Augustine lays that out in his fourfold view of the human will. Right after the fall, mankind cannot not sin. He uses a double negative there for emphasis. Leighton seems to think that this is the other way around, that we're saying, well, when they're not as bad as they can be, that means that sometimes they sin, sometimes they don't, right? They're not always doing these things. So he's saying, hey, let's bring that over to the spiritual eyes and the spiritual ears of the person. They're not always closed off to spiritual things. Well, Leighton, you're right in part. They can hear and see spiritual truths in that they can intake that data, right? And they can come to conclusions about what the church taught. They won't get all the way there, right? But they can't consent to that. They can't consent to those things and believe in them because they're always going to sin. They're slaves to sin. And Matt Slick is going to bring this up in a minute. And Leighton's just going to gloss right over it. I think he doesn't even get at it. In fact, one of the viewers, we're going to see in a minute, one of the viewers actually in this live stream that Leighton's doing, he brings it up. And Leighton and Warren both, they jump on him like he doesn't, like he has no idea what he's talking about. Well, I'm going to say this to you, Leighton and Warren, and I'll say it again when we get there, but I don't think you know what you're talking about. You may be able to lay out a historical case, but you can't get to the proper conclusions. Now, let's continue. I know I'll say more about that when we get to that point in a minute.
But for some reason, what Calvinists seem to do is to have double standard. Their hands and their feet aren't as bad as they possibly could be, but their eyes and their ears are as blind and deaf as they could be from birth.
No, again, they're as blind as they can be when it comes to whether or not they can intake, and I think Matt Slick uses a great word, receive those truths, right? To receive them, take them into their heart, for them to become part of their person and who they are. They can't do that apart from a work of God, right? But they can still hear those spiritual things and see those spiritual things as far as data is concerned. They can intake the information and they can do things with that. Some people at sometimes, though, become hardened later, and we'll get into this again somewhere in here, right? And they don't even see those things as good, as well anymore. But that's due to a long life of sin and unbelief, right? I want you to understand that. We don't posit there's this partial sinning of a person. Therefore, we're not going to posit that there is a partial seeing or hearing when it comes to the intake and the receipt of those spiritual things. No, the natural man cannot receive them, right? He cannot take them in and believe in them. He can get the data. He can understand what sin means historically. He can understand what the church has said about it. He can do things from a historical setting, right? But he can't intake it and believe it. All right. So you're just getting this completely wrong. If you say, well, you don't allow for people to be as bad as they can always over here, so you shouldn't allow for people to always be as blind as they are over here. No, you just don't understand what it means when we say that they're not as bad, right? They always sin. They never not sin. But when it comes to the horizontal effect, there are things that are more heinous on our society. There are things that God hates more than others. There are sins that God hates more than others. He hates someone who goes out and murders an innocent child more than he hates someone who helps someone for a selfish purpose. But nonetheless, the hating of the sin of the selfishness is still seen as a filthy rag unto the Lord. It's not as though that because that person, right, it doesn't matter that the person was selfish, and it doesn't matter that the person did this not because he feared and loved and revered his creator, right? That doesn't matter because he did this good deed. This good deed is just inherently good on its own, and it earns him some kind of credit with God. Not that it earns him salvation. I'm not even saying that, but it even earns him a nod, right? It doesn't earn him a nod. That act is still seen as a filthy rag, right? You have to understand this if you're going to understand what total depravity and the Calvinist position is here. The way that you go through and you lay this stuff out, it's I don't know what I want to say about it. It's not a good thing to do if you want to engage in a topic like this, right? And this isn't coming from someone who's a cage stage Calvinist. This isn't coming from someone who is a hyper Calvinist. I'm a compatibilist of the utmost, right? I even understand a lot of the early and modern Reformed in the way that they see contingency and freedom. Right? I don't even care about Calvinism, Leighton. I don't care if you're a Calvinist or not. I don't care. Listen, anybody out there listening, you don't have to be a Calvinist. Right? You can believe, I mean, there are wonderful brothers and sisters that are Arminians in the Methodist Church and such. And there are wonderful brothers that are going to Baptist churches that aren't Calvinists. They do great things in ministry, right? I don't care if you're a Calvinist or not, but you need to be accurate if you're going to critique a position like this from a position that you claim that is authoritative. Right, you've done your dissertation work on this. You have a doctorate in this category. You've been dealing with the subject for years, and yet you articulate the position such as this, and you even come out and make these videos like this. Right? Sorry if I'm getting a little passionate here, Leighton. I don't mean anything personal by this. I truly don't. I just get passionate about this topic. Right? I mean, it wouldn't even bother me if you're right. I mean, I know you're wrong. Y'all going to get into that here in a minute about epistemic certainty, which I think is a ridiculous route to take. I'll say now, but anyway, yeah, I'll save it. Let's continue a little bit because it's important what Matt Slick says there in a minute.
birth. And this is where we just push back and just say, no, use the exact same qualification. Just say their eyes aren't born as blind as they could be or as deaf as they could be. They are corrupted. They are cast out of the garden. They're distant from God, but they're still able to see, hear, and understand so as to turn, and I would heal them, as Acts 28, verse 27 says. And so he says they close their eyes is the reason they can't see. The reason they can't see is because they've grown callous. They've grown hardened.
Amen. 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 I don't disagree with any of that.
Because of their choice to sin and rebel against the things of God over time. And so I would just say for the Calvinists, they have their anthropology is halfway there. They should go ahead and say, just like we would say, they're not as bad as they could be with their hands. They're also not as blind as they could be with their eyes. They're not as deaf as they could be with their ears, but they could grow more and more blind. They could grow.
Yeah, refer back to what I've already said. This just makes no sense. Not according to the doctrine of total depravity and inability. It makes no sense whatsoever.
More and more deaf if they continue in their rebellion, just like their hands can grow more and more corrupt if they continue in that act of rebellion. And then they would have a good anthropology. You want to say something about that, Warren?
Yeah, I mean, like we said at the start of the show, I agree with you 100% on everything. So I'm going to have to say that without equivocation, I agree with everything you just said there. But adding to that just a smidge, I'll be a little bit of salt and pepper here. I would say that in the Psalms, you have the adder that stops its ear. That's how the wicked are described. It's one who stops listening. The wicked go astray. There's this corruption. There's this rebellion where they don't want to see. They don't want to hear. They stop listening. They grow hard. They become corrupted and wicked and rebellious and hard-hearted. And yet we see the heart of God on display even there, where he says, that he would and he was willing to, but they were not. And I think if you get a good understanding of the anthropology of man and you get a good view of the doctrine of God, the gospel clicks. All of a sudden it becomes good news because you're saying, oh.
All right, folks, had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. I'm short one USB-C port on my MacBook. Yeah, my Wi-Fi had a little bit of a issue keeping up with the stream, I think. So it wanted me to put in the wired connection. I can do that, but it took one of the spots in with my USB-Cs. So I lost my big monitor in front of me. The only thing it's going to do is going to cause me to look like this when I'm watching the video, because I'm having to look over here, over this way to the MacBook itself, rather than I have a nice big monitor right here in front of me, but I can't use it, right? Everything else is hooked in. All right. So anyway, not a big deal. I'll have it fixed before the next show. So, and I'm calling this a show, but I don't know if it's actually a show. Anyway, it is. It's my show, I suppose. Right? Gotcha. All right. So let's get back to the video here with Leighton and Warren.
Corrupted and wicked and rebellious and hard-hearted. And yet we see the heart of God on display even there, where he says, that he would and he was willing to, but they were not. And I think if you get a good understanding of the anthropology of man and you get a good view of the doctrine of God, the gospel clicks. All of a sudden it becomes good news because you're saying, oh, there's a good and loving God who, despite our sins, loved us when we were still his enemies. And we'd chosen to rebel against him. And he chose to come and lay down his life to show us love and call us home anyway, because he loved us and he knew we could. So I think that it's really important to have a good anthropology, because otherwise you end up in varying degrees of a pessimistic outlook, where I think not only does it, and we can get into this later, does it supplant any sort of assurance that you've arrived at spiritual truth, but I think that it can really cause a lot of doubt in a believer's life as to whether or not there's any hope there for them. The T falls into the U, into the L, into the I, into the P. And I know that when I was a Calvinist, I wrestled significantly with my own assurance and trusting God with the salvation for my children, and wondering, I've got 5 kids. Does he love that one? Does he love that one with a general call, but does he love that one with the effectual call?
Why is that for you to worry about, Warren? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be mean here. I understand what you're saying. I have kids too, right? I get what you're saying, but why should that cause you worry? Right? Think about it from a Calvinist perspective. I know you said back when I was a Calvinist, but I'm going to tell you something. I don't know that, like, none of this has actually, I suppose it never actually seeped in Because, yeah, while you question it, you still understand that God's ways are better than your ways, like no matter what. This is what it is about making God first and foremost in your life. Now, everybody doesn't do that, okay? But that and that's the nature of man. I mean, we're mutable creatures. We're not perfect. We can't just do away with thoughts that really make no sense at all, because I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to worry about things like that if it's the fact that the Creator has a greater plan than we do, right? That we can't go to Him and say, I don't think you should have did X that way, right? I mean, but as loving fathers, I get your point, Warren. I really do. You don't want any of your kids to not be part of God's family, part of His elect, right? And that would hurt you in your heart. No doubt, I'm with you on that. But if it's the case that you are grounded solidly in God as the Creator, whose ways are higher than our ways, He is not just some big man that is univocal with us and our decisions and our choices and our emotions and our passions, right? If that's the case, then I think He's big enough to handle whatever he already has it handled. I don't even want to talk like He's trying to figure things out, right? The problem is univocism. Right, that when you and here's why I brought this up in my last video, and I know Warren talks about it in a minute, or he kind of insinuates it or whatever with classical theism, but I think it really matters what view you have of God, right? If you are just positing God as this univocal being, similar, not even similar, the same as us, just on a larger scale, then yeah, you're going to have these problems because you have to think about, well, okay, then He's having to try to figure things out like we would. He just knows better than we do, right? He can think better than we can think, And this is why I asked Leighton to lay out his position on the doctrine of God. I think it's very important because of some of the analogies that he's given when it comes to this, right? That God is just, he's not he can win at chess without having to place both sides of the board, which means that He can just outplay humanity. What does that even mean, right? What position are you putting God in that you were saying that humanity even is in the game? We're not worthy to sit across the table from God, right? We are creatures from dust. On what platform are you putting us when it comes to like who God is? The same thing with Warren here, right? It brings about these questions, right? If you posit univocism when it comes to God and man, at least in some way, right, then these questions are raised. They're not necessary, and they're not necessary at all from a classical theist position when it comes to Reformed theology. Now, they're going to bring up Tyler later too, and Tyler Vela. I love you. I'll pray for you. You guys have known Tyler for a little while. I've been friends with him for many years before you even met him. I'll put it that way, Warren or Leighton. Right? I know him deeply. He's I'll pray for him, and I'm not going to get into talking about him because he's not here. But I don't even think it was a good thing the way that they're talking about him is specific, right? You're gonna use anecdotal situations to get into that. But yeah, I have an answer for what happened to Tyler. It's nothing really funny. But the point here is that how you posit God or who you think God is very important in these situations. Again, Warren, I'm not saying, right, because again, I'm a father. I'm not saying that those questions don't come up. I'm just saying that when you wrestle them out, you lose the worry, or you ought to lose the worry. In fact, Jesus Christ Himself said that what man can add 1 hour to his life by worrying, right? I'm not saying we're not going to worry, because we do. I'm not saying that we're not going to be anxious, because we are, right? That happens. That is who we are by nature, as mutable creatures. And isn't it so wonderful that God is not that way? Isn't He praiseworthy because He's not overcome by anxieties and pressures and worries, that He doesn't have to figure out the next day or the next week or the next year or the next month, the next 10 years. Right? Those things we can't fathom what that is, and there's a reason for that. It's because God is transcended. He is other than his creation. The creator creature distinction is very important, right? And if you don't have at least some basics in this, then I have no idea how you can even engage with Calvinism and the doctrine of total depravity at all. So, Leighton, again, I want to ask you, let us know where you stand on this. Do you agree with Warren when it comes to classical theism? You know, and as a side note on this, real quick, Warren, and I may bring it up again, but it's just on my mind, and I want to say it. I'm a classical theist, right? But I'm not a typical classical theist like you might run into. I don't have a problem with talking about some of the I don't know that I wouldn't call it adiaphora. Some of the secondary issues within classical theism, I think that some things can be questioned because of how other God is, but there are core essentials there that need to be guarded. Right? There are negative things that we can say about God. Right? We can do what's called apophatic theology, where we can say, well, we may not know exactly what God's nature is, but we can say what it isn't. Right? I think that's the case. But within that there are some things that can be questioned. There may not be an answer for. Mystery is perfectly fine. But some things that are like, yeah, okay, I understand what you're talking about. But an outright denial of a classical understanding, a Christian classical or a confessional understanding of who God is teetering close, if not completely outside of orthodoxy. Right? Especially positing like univocism in a way that comes away with God being a being much like we are, if not almost the same, just on a bigger setting. All right, let's continue. Sorry, I'm getting a little into these topics, but these topics are very important when it comes to this. If we can't think about who God is, it's hard to understand how he makes the choices that he does, or how he ever sets a decree forth, how he ever brings about anything. Right? If you don't think about these things. All right, let's go ahead.
You know, do I go the route of the Lutheran who says, well, because I'm a believer, my children are automatically, and I think that there's needless concern and needless confusion because of these original sin, total depravity, Augustinian anthropologies.
Right. Enrique Gonzalez, I think, is one of our resident Calvinists. At least I'm assuming he must be, based upon his points here. He says, "Oh boy, you didn't even try to understand the explanation." I'm assuming the explanation that Matt Slick gave. It's not about how much their eyes are blind or their ears. Well, actually, Calvinistic theology is about how spiritually blind and deaf they are.
No, Leighton. Enrique is right. This is what I say. You don't even get it. Like in Slick's explanation, it's not about how blind they are. They're completely blind when it comes to being able to receive that which is spiritually right, to take it in a way that they believe it, that they trust in it, that it becomes part of their life. Completely blinded off from that. They are not blind and deaf to being able to see and hear the data that comes from Scripture. Right? They can understand a lot. There can be some atheists out there, right? That are unbelievers that maybe understand the Bible better than those that are Christians, only in an informational sense. I think they don't believe it. It's not part of their life, and it won't be, because they will always reject it in that fashion. So yeah, it's not about how much their eyes are blind or their ears are closed. Enrique is 100% right, and Leighton's like it's just whoop right over his head.
Calvinists are very explicit, Matt Slick included, that men are born dead without eyes to see, ears to hear, unless given to them by God through an effectual work of grace. And so it is exactly about that, Mr. Gonzalez. And maybe Mr. Gonzalez is not familiar with Reformed theology. I don't know.
I love you, Leighton, but no. Sounds like Mr. Gonzalez is more informed about Reformed theology than you are. Let's continue. And yeah, anyway.
And sometimes it requires for people to explain to Calvinists what Calvinism is, because
Yeah, I've only been a Calvinist for like 25 years. About just a few months away from an MDiv, and you know, a 90-hour MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, pastor in a church for 4 years, in Bible studies, leading Bible studies constantly. Been studying deeply in soteriology and the Calvinist Arminian debate, and with the Provisionists, was around with Leighton for the past 20 years, but I have no idea what Calvinism is when it comes to this. Like, no, Enrique gets it better than you do at this point. Yeah, sure, you understand the history of it, and you can use this terminology, but you're not getting to the point of what we're saying. Again, I've already laid it out. I'm not going to go through it again, but yeah, let's continue.
Some of them have not listened to or understood their scholars. Maybe I'm misunderstanding Enrique there.
Yeah, I've listened to, I understand the scholars. I've had the scholars teach me personally in seminary, right? I've sat under Tom Schreiner, one of the leading, you would say, Calvinists in the Southern Baptist Convention. You understand quite well as any other here that most all of the professors at Southern are Calvinist or Calvinistic at least. I've had a ton of them, right? Dr. Stephen Wellham, you know, all of them I've been under. I understand them quite well. I know what they say. Dr. Wilsey up there for philosophy. I had him for church history. I had a couple others for church history. Anyway, yeah, I have read the scholars. I have I don't know how many books over here. They're not all Calvinistic. Leighton, your book is on my shelf over there. I've read it, right? I don't just read within the tradition, but I do read within the tradition. So yeah, I do understand the Calvinist scholars. I do understand what they've said about it, and I understand the doctrine of total depravity and what it means for us to be enabled. Let's continue.
He goes on to say, total depravity only says that all of human beings have been touched by sin, including his desires and his will. There's nothing to do with if that's all total depravity is, then we're all adherents to total depravity. I mean,
well, you should be if you're Christian. That's the point, right? That is all that total depravity means, except that what it means by that is that everything that the unbeliever does is sin. It's just not as bad as it can be all the time. They're not as heinous. But to be apart from God just is to be to be wicked. Doesn't matter what level you are. Doesn't matter what level, as far as society's considered that you are. Like, you can take the worst mass murderer in the history of the world. Whoever you want to lay that label on, right? The most heinous killer that you can find in all of history, and then you can take the most innocent looking to us unbeliever on the face of the planet, whoever that is not a believer in Jesus Christ, but their life other than that looks extremely moral. And that heinous killer, that world's worst, and this basically moral person that we would see from the horizontal level, they're both going to hell if they die, apart from faith in Jesus Christ. Right? Understand that. Get that through your head. That's what total depravity is talking about. That's the different levels. And when it comes to hardening, it is the moving of a person from here, the lightest level of moral moral wickedness, I guess you would say, as far as we're concerned, right, on the horizontal, what looks to us to be a fairly moral life, moving toward the most wicked and heinous person in the entire world, right? There are a lot of steps in between those two. That's a lot of hardening a person can go throughout their life as they continue in their unbelief. It's absolutely unbelievable that this is not understood by Leighton and Warren here, as much as they have been in this topic. I really don't understand how you don't get it. Leighton all the time as well. How does someone who's born hardened become hardened? Well, I just explained it very simply, I don't know if you'd call that concisely. Maybe I talked a little bit much there, but I mean, it's simple to understand. It is not difficult. Right. And if you want to engage with this, at least understand that much. Matt Slick he explained it almost. He didn't get into the details I got into, but I mean, I'm kind of seeing where Leighton and Warren are missing here. right? So I'm trying to fill in those gaps, trying to give the analogies in a way that they can understand them. You have the worst person in the entire world. It's hard to see on this angle, but all right, on my left hand, you have the worst, most wicked, terrible sinner in the entire world in my left, and then the right, you have the person who is the least wicked, but still an unbeliever, right? Still not part of the family of God, still a sinner that is condemned if they don't come to Christ in faith, but they are they look the best. You might look at them and think they're very moral. Think about Mormons, right? Mormons are very moral people if you look at their lives. But apart from faith in Jesus Christ, and unless they repent and come to the true Jesus Christ, and then they're going to die in hell. Right? But you take this person over here in my right hand who is least wicked, the least wicked that you would know of the unbelievers, and the person over here on my left hand who is the most wicked, and there is a ton of room in between, right? There's a lot of room for the person on the right to come back to the left, or to go to the left a lot, and there's room on there's only room for the person on the left to repent and come to Christ in faith, right? Well, actually, they could become a little better in their life as well, but they would still be within their unbelief, right? Maybe they just don't do quite as wicked things that they did before. Again, if I'm getting a little passionate here, sorry. Again, it's my show, but I do want to be respectful in a way. But honestly, Leighton, think about what that means, right? Just the analogy and how that would pan out, right? This is what total depravity and the Calvinist understanding of inability means. The Calvinist understanding of what it means to be touched by sin. It's just what it is. Let's go.
I think that sin has touched all of us in every way that you're saying. But it doesn't mean that people can't confess that fact when confronted by God. Go ahead.
On my channel, I have a poorly produced but very thoroughly researched series on original sin. And in episode 1, I lay out a steel man of this view. My goal there was not to be accused of a straw man or charging a windmill or not understanding.
Now, Warren, I did hear Warren say this, and Warren, I will say this. I haven't seen that, but I will watch it. I'm not saying that you didn't do exactly what you just said that you did. When I'm interacting here, I'm interacting with what you have said on this podcast. Okay? So I will go and I'll watch that episode. And maybe I'll make a critique video of it, and go through it and give you praise where you deserve praise on it, and maybe give you some critique, I think, where you deserve a critique. But I'm going to take your by your word and what you say here, but I will critique some of the things you say within this video according to this video. I will watch the other one, though.
And I built a very thorough historical framework for understanding this so we can arrive at a definition. And I've yet to have any adherent of total depravity who's studied it take issue with it. In fact, they were congratulatory and saying they could use it as a teaching aid, and they thought that it created a problem for me because I was so thorough in that. And one of the things that I documented there was it was precisely this historical view that led R.C. Sproul to see children as less than rats.
Well, yeah, think about that. All right, he thinks this is like a killer thing when it comes to seeing children as less than rats. What did I just say about the two extremes of unbelievers? The most wicked, the one who looks the most, or the one who looks the least wicked, or the least wicked of unbelievers, right? That's a big extreme there. You've got your Maos and your Stalins on one hand, and your Hitlers, and then on the other side you have people who are who've never hurt anybody physically, right? But they deny God's existence, or they deny that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, right? All of those people, right? All of those people are condemned to hell, right? Apart from them coming to Christ in faith, repenting and coming to Christ in faith, they're going to hell to burn. Rats aren't moral, right? Rats aren't sinning against God. Now, if you posit that children are inside of this unbelief category, as I do, I think it's something that can be done, but there is a question there as to how God treats children. I'm not going to get into that. I think that question is a legitimate question to have, but I'm just positing for a second how R.C. Sproul comes to this conclusion that he does, right? But rats are not moral creatures. Therefore, they are not under the condemnation of God. Rats are not going to hell. Right? So if we're thinking about who people are apart, from the perspective of God, then yes, then if children are wicked, or if they are unbelievers held under the condemnation and wrath of God, and unless they repent and believe, then yeah, then they're lower than rats, right? Because rats aren't moral creatures. They're not condemned to hell. That's the point of R.C. Sproul. I don't know why that's something that is unbelievable. I know it sounds bad, right? Sure, it's shocking. I'm sure that's why he said it, right? There's shock value in saying things like that, but at least understanding what he meant is important. Okay, let's continue.
To have, Dr. Bachman,
They're kind of the viper and diapers
in the
kinds
diaper,
of things.
this Paul Washer seeing children as having this murderous heart. So it definitely goes far beyond the idea that just sin has.
Well, I mean, David said that his mother conceived him in sin, right? In sin did my mother conceive me. I don't think he was calling his mother a harlot. David was recognizing his sinfulness from birth. Anyway, let's continue.
Has touched us, but that it's that our spirit or soul.
Excuse me. David was seeing his sinfulness from conception. All right, let's go.
Our intellect, our flesh, are stained by sin, under God's wrath, and totally unable to cry out to Him for help, to recognize our own sin. I mean, the canon 7 of Orange says we can't even form a right opinion.
Right. When you're positing the correct understanding of right, there doesn't mean you can't have an opinion that 2 + 2 = 4. Right? I mean, Warren kind of just laid that out there. Like the canon of Orange says that you can't even form a right opinion. Well, then apparently, if you're not a Christian, you can't even rationally have a discussion about anything, right? Let alone the Bible. Yeah, you can't form an opinion in a positive fashion for a spiritual truth, right? Which means that you can't. It's not that you can't speak about it historically, but you can't receive it into yourself. All right, let's continue here.
Regarding any spiritual truth. So it makes much stronger claims than just sin's in the world and it's affected us.
Consistent Calvinist is on.
I guess I need to take that back. I stopped Warren a little bit quickly there. He said, according to any spiritual truth, is how they can. What Orange is talking about there when they say you can't even form an opinion. I said it could be applied to 2 + 2. He's not inferring that. Sorry about that, Warren.
Opinion. Regarding any spiritual truth. So it makes much stronger claims than just sin's in the world and it's affected us.
Consistent Calvinist is on, and he says the point is that by nature fallen man. And but just interrupt here. What Calvinists mean by nature is by decree, because all that's natural.
What is the decree, Leighton? Let me sit up. I think if I sit up, yeah, that'll be better. All right, man. Yeah, I was kind of comfortable sitting back there too. All right, but I'll sit up to get out of the sun, make that a little bit better. Again, I'm going to have to look down here, but yeah. What do you mean by nature? Or what do you mean by decree, rather, Leighton? Do you think the decree makes our nature? Does it cause our nature? I can give you a hint. It doesn't. Doesn't at all, right? But he'll assume that. That's what we're going to hear.
Is by divine decree. In other words, nature's not causing this. None of us believe in Mother Nature. Like Mother Nature is the one who's causing this to happen. And it's just happening.
But we believe in secondary causation, right? Like the creation is a thing. When we believe in a transcendent God, it's not as though the transcendent God is pulling strings on the creation like this. No, he works providentially through secondary causation within creation itself. This is like the doctrine of divine providence here. I don't know, like he thinks he can just say that because God decreed it and it somehow makes a case for him. I don't know. It's it blows my mind at times.
Happening by happenstance of what nature, it's just a natural. They're not naturalists, because a naturalist might say it's a cause by a natural phenomenon or something like that. It's caused by divine decree. So the point is,
it's caused by divine decree. No, it comes about, right, according to the divine decree, but it's not caused by divine decree. The divine decree doesn't reach out and do things. What sun's moving pretty fast. It actually might go down pretty fast. The divine decree doesn't reach out there and do things any more than the decree. The plan of a house gets up and builds the house. Do you think that's what happens, Leighton? Like, have you ever been in construction? I think Warren has. He would understand this analogy, I think, right? I was in commercial construction, well, commercial and residential construction for the better part of like 12 years. Built many commercial plumbing systems, a ton of residential. And not one time have I ever seen a set of plans jump up and build the building that we were on. Just, it hasn't happened. Right, there were other causations that came about in order for the plan to be built. You had the architect who laid the foundation on the plans, at least, right, laid out what was to be. But then what happened, what came to be, was done through other causations. And it might even be that the architect kind of, controlled those other means. Of course, this is a terrible analogy that you can't do one-to-one, but it works when it comes to like what the divine decree is and understanding how it is not an actual cause on anything external to God. It's the plan that God has laid out. But anyway, here we go.
The consistent Calvinist is saying the point is that by God's decree, fallen men will harden and blind themselves against the things of God. So God decrees that everybody will rebel and blind themselves and harden themselves to himself. He's decreed for them to do that. So what he's doing, whether he admits it or not, he would never say he's doing this, but he's removing human responsibility by
no, not removing it, actually establishing it. I mean, have you read the WCF or the Second London Baptist Confession? Chapter 3 is very specific as to what they say, right? They have a lot of apophatic theology in there, negative theology, and they do that for a reason, right? It's hard to say positive things, but they will say that, look, this divine decree or this decree of God that brings about all things, one thing that it doesn't do, it doesn't take away contingency or freedom, and it doesn't and it doesn't destroy our freedom. Let me get this right. I'm still trying to like get out of this sun. The sun is it's a terrible time to make a video, Chris. What'd you do this for? It's because the kids are out of the house. It was a good time to do it. So the Second London Confession, or the WCF, it goes into the fact that it is God's decree that establishes our liberty. It establishes our freedoms. Yeah, it doesn't destroy it. And Leighton's like, yeah, it destroys it. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
Blaming God instead of the man for freely doing it when he could have done it otherwise. He's saying God has decreed, he has created the man.
You see, he keeps smuggling this thing in, right? It's if you don't know what it's called when he keeps saying otherwise, he's smuggling in this idea that what is necessary for freedom is the principle of alternate possibilities, right? So that it would say that in order for an agent to be free and responsible, he would have to have the ability or the power to do other than he did if given the choice under the exact same circumstances and conditions. My position on that, I'm not going to get into it deeply. I don't think that, and I may have changed my settings here. I did. Look at that. This mic has a little touch bar on it, and sometimes you can change things on accident. Let me get back here. Yeah, that's gonna sound a whole lot different, a whole lot better, I hope. I gotta watch how I grab the mic. I have to grab it down here. So anyway, when it comes to the principle of alternate possibilities, my take on that is that I don't think it's necessary in order to establish freedom and responsibility. But if it happens to be necessary, we as Calvinists can confirm it. It's just the only way that we can't confirm it is in a contra-causal sense, which is libertarian free sense. That's not a problem, though, because there are a number of ways to affirm the principle of alternate possibilities. This is philosophical stuff that's it's not exactly basic, right? But Leighton doesn't take it into account. He like just assumes that what he thinks is needed for responsibility and freedom just is needed for responsibility and freedom. Like someone in my case, I don't even know exactly what is needed. I know there are some things, like I think choice is needed. I think freedom is needed in order for a human to be responsible. But then you have to ask what those are. Now, I don't want to get into that We're already long into this video. I'm already over an hour, which is more than I wanted to do. But when it comes to doing these things, I mean, there's so much. And I don't know why my mic keeps jumping off of that same setting. Okay, now it's better. Anyway, when you get to interacting with Leighton on some of these things, the videos just run long. Sorry about that. And sorry if the mic keeps changing. I don't know if I keep touching it and it changes or what, but hopefully it'll stay there. All right, let's continue.
To only be able to harden and blind himself, against his own will and his own appeals. That's what we're arguing against. This is a perfect example of what we're arguing against. They're removing human responsibility by saying God decrees for people to blind themselves from birth against his own appeals to be reconciled from that fall. There are degrees of hardening. He goes,
I don't even know what that means. I mean, I can listen to the words and I can tell you what the words mean, right? He's painting a picture that God is either a computer programmer or a marionette, right? That he's a puppeteer with puppets that he's doing it. But that doesn't describe the complexity that is found in the Reformed tradition when it comes to freedom and contingency, right? If you want to just engage with low-hanging fruit Calvinists that are on the internet that have not a clue what they're talking about, then please continue to do that. But if you want to come into the realm of those of us who are Calvinists who have a better understanding of the philosophical side of these things, you need to know and to speak and to use terminology in a little better way. This is almost I don't want to say unforgivable. I mean, because I like you, I do like you, Leighton. I would love to like have lunch or supper or something, have a drink, get together in the afternoon. I would love to do some stuff like that. But when it comes to this stuff, I just can't, right? I just can't. The literature's out there. I know you've like tried to interact with Bignon a little bit. And here's the thing: it's not just Bignon, right? You've got Michael Preciado. You've got Colton that is doing some really great work in this stuff, which is proud for him, right? On the side of freedom and contingency. But not only do you have that, you also had another friend of ours, meaning that we both know him, that has reached out to you several times about this stuff, Josh Smith, when it comes to what is found in the Reformed tradition when it comes to freedom and contingency. So I'm not just talking about modern analytic theology, analytic philosophy, rather. I'm also talking about like pre-modern stuff, like stuff from the medieval times, that this is old thinking when it comes to freedom and contingency, and it's found right in the middle of the tradition that you're arguing against right now. Right, and I think Josh is actually trying to give you some stuff that was friendly to your view, that might help you build a better argument that could be actually have some historical roots. Now, Josh and I disagree about that. That's a whole different thing. It's an internal debate, on exactly the idea of freedom and contingency in the early and late modern Reform. But that's fine. My point is that he's tried to give that stuff to you for you to look at. And you just keep saying these same things over again, as though they interact with anyone within the Reformed tradition. I don't know what to do, buddy. All right, so let's continue now. Got really passionate in that section.
Goes on to argue, total depravity does not deny hardening sinners can become more hardened. How do you become more dead? How do you become more blind to truth?
I've already touched on this. I've not just touched on this. I've already explained this with the two people that are the two extreme sides of unbelievers. Okay, Leighton, I have already interacted with this. I've already given you the explanation for this, and I do pray that you watch this. The two sides of unbelievers, right? The most wicked and the least wicked. It's the best way to explain it, right? I just want to give you the two extremes. If you have all the unbelievers in the world and you line them up from the most wicked to the least wicked, you would have a pretty good gap, right? I think we would all agree on that. Between that gap is all the room in the world for someone to harden themselves. The one on the least wicked side has a lot of room to become more wicked, right? To become more hard. It all because of their unbelief. I mean, this should be like basic stuff. I don't know how he doesn't see this. The consistent Calvinist podcast guy here is just telling him straight out. The point is that by nature, fallen man will harden and blind themselves against the things of God. There are degrees of hardening. Yes, exactly. There are a lot of different degrees in between the least wicked unbeliever and the most wicked unbeliever. Total depravity does not deny hardened sinners can become more hardened. Exactly like I've laid out like three times now.
Then totally blind from truth. This is just, it's like saying gobbledygook is true. Okay, what do you mean by that? And I'm not trying to be mean to consistent Colin, I believe his name is. I'm not trying to be mean to you, brother. I'm saying this in love.
Well, I mean, he means exactly what he said. He means exactly what he said, that right, unbelievers can become worse than they were.
I'm not trying to be mean to consistent Colin, I believe his name is. I'm not trying to be mean to you, brother. I'm saying this in love. What do you mean? What give us some qualitative difference between somebody born totally depraved and somebody who has become totally, completely hardened as anybody could possibly become.
I think I've did that like 3 or 4 times in this. Leighton, please watch.
What is the spiritual condition difference between those two in their ability to respond to God? On your view?
What does it matter about the spiritual condition as far as to whether or not they can receive spiritual things, right? We're talking about that the hardening. The hardening is moving them toward being worse than they were, to bring about something in a way, right? That they are a worse sinner than they were before. They do more heinous and wicked things.
Nothing. There is absolutely no more ability for an 8-year-old who is depraved and a reprobate than an 80-year-old who has spent his entire adult life fighting the things of God and arguing against it. Both of them have zero capacity, apart from regeneration, of responding to and seeing and embracing the things of God. And so that this whole thing about, well, they can become more hardened, that doesn't mean anything.
And if you look at his first line here, he says the point is that by nature fallen man will harden and blind themselves. So it seems as though he's suggesting they're not born that way, which is completely.
Yeah, they're not born as bad as they can be. That's the point, right? So yeah, by nature, fallen man will become worse as they continue in unbelief.
Odds with the doctrine of total depravity anyway.
But even the least of the fallen and depraved are worthy of death and condemnation. They're sinners.
If he wants to say that men go astray and become hard and blind, okay. I mean, I can concede that. Like, that we all go astray. Whoever says he has not sinned, there's not the truth in him. But it seems as though he's trying to say that total depravity isn't our default condition by his opening sentence, and then goes on to somewhat counter this and say, well, they're hardened sinners. They're created hard and blind, but they'll become more so. So there's a lot of a but not a argumentation within that Calvinistic framework where it's like, yeah, they're born.
Did you catch that? Warren trying to slyly throw in there that he thinks that's just a logical contradiction. Well, no, it's not. I've explained it. All right, let's go.
Blind, they're born hardened, they're born totally depraved, but they're not totally depraved. Mm-hmm. What are we talking about at this point?
Again, totally depraved. Like, do you not understand that the entirety of the person is touched by sin? That's what totally depraved means. Totally is in relation to how much of the person is affected by sin. That's simple to understand. If you can't get that, then how can you even claim? And I'll have to watch it. Right, I just have to take your word right now. How can you claim that you dealt with this basically what he said earlier is he's dealt with it in an exhaustive fashion in a video where he built a steel man, right? If you can't get this point right here, I don't have a lot of confidence that I'm going to find that when I watch that video, Warren. Sorry.
I'll let you fill this one, John, or Warren, from John Moore. He's saying, if you're spiritually dead, how do you become spiritually alive?
All right, so I will answer this from a Calvinist perspective. If you are spiritually dead, how do you become spiritually alive? Well, you come alive eternally and receive eternal life only through faith in Christ. But to be reborn or born from above, that comes about through regeneration, which isn't equal to eternal life. But it does give you the ability to be able to then receive those spiritual things of God so that you can come to Christ in faith and have everlasting life.
Or he's saying, if you're spiritually dead, how do you become spiritually alive?
Yeah, I mean, you can mock me for using an analogy that, or a parable, or you can mock me for using an example that Christ used. But I think he's a good teacher and reliable, so I'm going to default to Christ on this.
Probably
but
so.
yeah, I think it's a safe choice. I may get some criticism and some flack for it, but I'm okay with that. But Jesus, he gave us the example of the prodigal who was dead. He was dead in his sins. He was in a far away land. His sins had taken him.
Yeah, the prodigal's a terrible place to go here. Again, I think I mentioned this in my last video, that the prodigal son was always a son. He never was not a son. You don't have someone going from a like being the son of Satan or the son of a devil or a goat moving to be a sheep. Right? The prodigal son would have been a sheep from the get-go. Never changed. I don't think it's a good soteriological picture. The parable was meant to speak to the other son, right, who didn't rejoice in his brother's return, because the Pharisees were having an issue with Jesus and who he was eating with, who he was keeping time with. That is what brought about the three parables that we have in that section, and the primary one, of course, being the prodigal. So it's not a soteriological parable. It is meant to provide an answer to the Pharisees as to what Jesus was doing. Right now, I'm not going to get into exactly what that is because I don't feel like getting into the deep exegesis of that at the moment. But we'll let Warren continue.
Far from the Father's house, love and provision, and he was dead, and he came to his senses, and he returned home, and he didn't think that his return home was meritorious, and he didn't show up demanding that he be reinstated and given his inheritance all over again. He wanted to just serve in his father's house as a servant. But the father ran out and said, "My son who was dead is alive again." To be spiritually dead does not mean that your soul is a withered, ethereal corpse inside your body. To be spiritually dead is to be separated through rebellion from the love and provision and plan and care that God has for you. It's to choose death rather than life. And we can, while we still have life, because we're a whole person, we can come to our senses when we hear the gospel. We can come to our senses when we fall under conviction. We can come to our senses when our pain breaks through our stubbornness and we go, "This just is stupid. Why am I doing this to myself? God, your way."
All right. I'm going to end it right here. Let me undo Warren. I think he looks a little better there. I'm going to end it right here because we're coming up on the hour and 30-minute mark, and I really don't want to go past that. So, yeah, I would just ask Warren, like, does this not mean that our actions are meritorious in some way, in some sense? I'm not saying that you do anything to save yourself, but it just seems as though that if it is the case that our spiritual life comes by way of us realizing our need to have spiritual life, how does that even work? I don't know. And anyway, remember what I said about the way that people can be hardened as unbelievers and what it means to be totally depraved. I appreciate you sticking around this long. If you appreciate this content, give me a share, give me a like. Hit the subscribe button down there. Get in the comments, ask some questions. I love to answer questions. I really do. Maybe next time I'll have the camera lowered maybe a little bit because it seems like I'm having to look up a little too much to look into it. And I'll get this fixed with the monitor. I have another USB-C port for my computer. I'll get another adapter on the way for that. I mean, I have 3. You would think I have enough, but that's just not enough. I need at least one more. So I may get one that has a few more than that. So anyway, thank you for sticking around, putting up with me. My getting passionate at times speaking about this, but I mean, I think these things are important. There are a lot of people out there that are asking these questions. That's the ones that I'm doing this for. I want you to at least have an understanding from both sides of this thing. I don't think Leighton does a very good job of laying out some of the doctrines within Calvinism. Some I think he does do a good job on. This one I think he does a terrible job on, which is okay. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. That doesn't mean that we have to look down on Leighton at all, or that we have to treat him in a different way than anyone else. I mean, he is a fellow brother in Christ. He is a theology nerd like myself. And he has other ministries that he's involved with. He's not just simply a anti-Calvinist, if you will, if you even take that terminology, whatever. He's not. No matter what Dr. White says, as much as I love Dr. White, right? Leighton's not a one-string banjo. It's just that this is what we see most of the time. Is what we interact with most of the time. We don't see everything else that he does, right? We appreciate all the work that he does within the Baptist churches and the Baptist denomination. So Leighton, I hope you take that to heart. Not here to get into a fight with you per se. I am when it comes to some of these theological positions, but it's just the nature of being a theology nerd, right? Thank you all, and I will check you out on the next show.